In this gripping tale of love, betrayal, and resilience, Daniel Rhodes thought his life was perfect, until he uncovered a web of lies that shattered his marriage. As his wife Emily's secret affair spirals into deeper deception, Daniel finds himself caught in a high-stakes battle to protect his reputation and sanity. With shocking twists and revelations that push him to the brink, Daniel must confront the truth about his past and fight for a future free of betrayal. Will he find the strength to rebuild his life? Or will the shadows of trust destroy him completely? Watch to uncover the truth. Shadows of trust. I'm Daniel Rhodes, a 38-year-old software engineer. And if you told me a year ago that my life would unravel like this, I wouldn't have believed you. But here we are. It all started in a little suburban pocket of New Haven, Connecticut, where life seemed as routine as the morning coffee run. I had been married to Emily for nearly 10 years. She was the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking into it, outgoing, funny, and impossibly charming. We were that couple everyone envied. Or so I thought. We lived in a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom house, the kind with a creaky floorboard right outside the kitchen that you never bother to fix because it just feels like home. We had no kids, though not for lack of trying. For years, we'd been battling through countless doctor visits and fertility treatments, and the disappointment had taken its toll. Emily, who worked as an event planner, threw herself into her job, while I buried myself in code and long hours at the office. We were busy, distracted, and maybe a little too comfortable with the distance growing between us. Still, I didn't see it coming. Emily was hosting a gala at a downtown art gallery. She'd been excited about it for weeks, buzzing about every little detail, from the champagne selection to the placement of the floral arrangements. On the night of the event, I decided to surprise her by dropping by after work. I figured it would be a nice gesture. Show her I cared. I arrived in time to see her on stage, speaking to the crowd with that easy confidence of hers. She looked stunning in a navy blue dress that hugged her in all the right places, her smile lighting up the room. As I made my way through the crowd, someone grabbed my arm. It was Peter, one of Emily's co-workers. Peter and I weren't close, but we'd shared a few beers at company mixers over the years. He gave me this strange look, like he wasn't sure if he should say something or not. "Didn't think you'd be here," he said, his voice a little too casual. "Why wouldn't I be?" I replied, confused. He hesitated, and then smiled. "Never mind, good to see you, Dan." Something about his tone stuck with me, but I brushed it off. Paranoia wasn't my style. After Emily's speech, she spotted me and came over, her eyes lighting up with surprise. "What are you doing here?" she asked, leaning in for a quick kiss. "Thought I'd support my favorite event planner," I said with a grin. Her laugh was warm, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, no. I told myself I was imagining things. The evening passed uneventfully, though I noticed Emily glancing at her phone a few times more than usual. On the drive home, I brought it up casually. "Busy night, huh?" "You seem glued to your phone." She smiled tightly. "Just last-minute details, you know how it is." I wanted to believe her I really did, but there was a distance in her voice, like she was holding something back. I let it go for the moment. The cracks started to show in the weeks that followed. Emily became more distant, more distracted. She started staying late at work more often, citing one event after another. I tried to be supportive, but the nagging feeling that something was off wouldn't go away. Then came the night I found the first real clue. It was a Friday evening, and Emily was supposedly out with a client I had just gotten home from work when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She'd forgotten it, which was unusual for her. The screen lit up with a notification, a text from someone named Aiden. "Can't wait to see you again," it read, followed by a heart emoji. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I stood there, frozen. Emily wasn't the kind of person to have secrets, or at least, I thought she wasn't. I picked up the phone and stared at the message, debating whether to open it. The temptation was overwhelming, but something held me back. Instead, I put the phone down and sat on the couch, my mind racing. When Emily came home later that night, I tried to play it cool. "How was the meeting?" I asked, watching her carefully. "Exhausting," she said, kicking off her heels and pouring herself a glass of wine. "Clients can be so demanding." She looked so composed, so normal, that I almost believed her, almost. Over the next few days, I couldn't get the text out of my head. Who was Aiden? A co-worker? A client? I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. But the more I thought about it, the more the doubts crept in. I started noticing little things. Her phone always face down on the table, her sudden need for privacy during calls, the way she'd smile at a message and then quickly tuck her phone away. One evening, while Emily was in the shower, I gave in to the urge. I picked up her phone and unlocked it. Her passcode was the same as it had always been. My heart raced as I opened her messages. Sure enough, there was a thread with Aiden. The conversation wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. The tone was playful, flirtatious. He called her Ems, a nickname I hadn't heard in years. She joked about stealing moments, and how she couldn't wait until next time. My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages, each one a dagger to the heart. When Emily came out of the bathroom, I was back on the couch, pretending to scroll through my own phone. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed time to process, to figure out what to do. The days that followed were a blur of suspicion and heartbreak. I started paying closer attention, piecing together a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Emily's late nights at work often coincided with Aiden's texts. Her excuses grew thinner, her stories less believable. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage, trapped in a web of lies I hadn't spun. I finally decided to confront her one Saturday morning. She was sipping coffee at the kitchen table, scrolling through her laptop. I sat down across from her, my heart pounding. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Who's Aiden?" Her reaction was immediate. The color drained from her face, and she set her mug down with a shaky hand. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she looked up at me, her eyes wide with something between panic and regret. Emily stared at me, her hands gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. For a moment, I thought she might deny everything I could see, the wheels turning in her mind, her eyes darting as if searching for the right words to make this all go away. "Aiden," she started, her voice trembling. "He's a co-worker. We've been working on a project together, that's all." The lie hit me like a cold slap, and I couldn't help but laugh, bitter and sharp. "A co-worker?" I said, leaning forward. "Do you always call your co-workers sweetheart, or tell them you can't wait to steal another moment?" Her face crumpled, the guilt cracking through her defenses. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, her voice rising. We've been talking, that's all, nothing has happened." I wanted to believe her God, I wanted to. But the evidence was staring me in the face, and deep down, I knew this wasn't just talking. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but ice cold. "Don't insult me. I've seen the messages, I know what's been going on, just tell me the truth." She looked away, tears pooling in her eyes. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. Aiden made me feel seen. You've been so distant, so caught up in work, I felt invisible." The words cut deeper than I expected. Was I distant? Had I pushed her into this? For a brief, agonizing moment, I blamed myself. But then the anger flared up, sharp and unforgiving. Whatever problems we had, she'd chosen to betray me instead of talking to me. "Do you love him?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. She didn't answer right away. That silence was all the confirmation I needed. The days that followed were a blur of arguments, avoidance, and icy silence. Emily swore up and down that she hadn't slept with Aiden, that it had just been emotional, but it didn't matter. The trust was gone. Every time she looked at her phone, I felt a fresh wave of suspicion and anger. One evening, I came home early from work, hoping to clear my head. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed a car parked a little too close to the curb. A sleek, silver sedan I didn't recognize. My stomach knotted. When I stepped inside, the faint sound of laughter floated from the living room. I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears. Quietly, I set my bag down and walked toward the sound. There they were, Emily and Aiden, sitting on the couch like it was their home. His arm rested casually along the back of the sofa, too close to her for comfort. They didn't see me at first, too caught up in whatever they were laughing about. "Am I interrupting something?" I asked, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. Emily jumped to her feet, her face a mask of panic. Aiden, on the other hand, had the audacity to look smug, as if he belonged there. "Daniel, this isn't what it looks like," Emily started, her voice pleading. "Oh, really?" I said, crossing my arms. "Because it looks a lot like my wife is entertaining her co-worker in our living room." Aiden stood up, hands raised in mock surrender. "Hey, man, I think we should all just calm down." I snapped. Before I knew it, I had crossed the room and shoved him back down onto the couch. "Don't you dare tell me to calm down," I growled. "Get out of my house now." Aiden hesitated for a moment, glancing at Emily as if waiting for her permission. When she didn't say anything, he grabbed his jacket and left, muttering something under his breath. As the door slammed behind him, I turned to Emily. She was crying now, her hands covering her face. "This has to stop, Emily," I said, my voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Whatever this is, it ends now, or we do." She nodded, her sobs shaking her shoulders. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'll end it, I promise." For a moment, I wanted to believe her, but trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. In the weeks that followed, Emily tried to make amends. She deleted Aiden's number, blocked him on social media, and even agreed to counseling. For a while, it seemed like we might be able to rebuild what we'd lost. But the cracks in our marriage were too deep, the wounds too fresh. One evening, while scrolling through my emails, I found a message from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "You deserve to know the truth." Curiosity and a deep sense of dread compelled me to open it. Inside was a series of screenshots, texts between Emily and Aiden, explicit texts, the kind that left no room for doubt about what had been happening behind my back. My heart sank as I read them, the words blurring through my tears. So much for just talking. When I confronted Emily, she didn't even try to deny it. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her voice hollow. "Well, congratulations," I said, my voice breaking. "You did." That night, I packed a bag and left the house, the life we'd built together. It all felt like a lie. Looking back, I realized there were signs all along, little things I ignored or explained away because I wanted to believe in us. But sometimes, love isn't enough. This isn't the ending I wanted, but it's the one I got. Life doesn't always go the way you plan. And sometimes, the only thing you can do is pick up the pieces and move on. If this story resonates with you, or you've been through something similar, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned for more stories like this. As the weeks turned into months after I left Emily, life became a blur of half-packed boxes, strained conversations with lawyers, and the suffocating weight of betrayal. I had moved into a one-bedroom apartment downtown, the kind of place where the sound of traffic at all hours was both a distraction and a comfort. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A small haven away from the lies and deceit that had poisoned my marriage. Despite everything, part of me couldn't stop thinking about Emily. Not in a longing way. At least, that's what I told myself. But in the way you can't look away from a car crash. I found myself wondering if she'd moved on, if she was still seeing Aidan, or if she regretted anything at all. Then, one rainy Thursday evening, my phone buzzed. A notification lit up the screen. A new email. The sender Emily. I hesitated before opening it, my finger hovering over the screen. Did I really want to dive back into this mess? But curiosity won out. The email was short, almost clinical. Daniel, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I need to talk to you. Please, just one conversation. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to explain everything. Emily. I stared at the message, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to delete it and move on, to keep the distance I'd worked so hard to establish. But another part of me, the part that still needed closure, decided to respond. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. at Benson's Cafe, 1 hour. The reply came almost instantly. Thank you. The next evening, I walked into the cafe, my stomach tied in knots. Emily was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She looked different, thinner, tired, her once bright eyes shadowed with regret. Thanks for coming, she said as I sat down. Let's just get this over with, I replied, my voice colder than I intended. She nodded, taking a deep breath. I'm not here to beg for forgiveness or to ask for another chance. I know I ruined everything, but I owe you the truth. And then she told me everything. It started innocently. She said late-night work sessions with Aidan, long conversations that blurred the line between professional and personal. She hadn't meant for it to go further. But one night, after a particularly stressful day, they'd kissed. That was the beginning of the end. It wasn't love, she admitted, her voice cracking. It wasn't even about you. It was about me, feeling desirable, wanted. But it didn't mean anything. Not really. I sat there, letting her words sink in. It didn't mean anything, I repeated, my voice rising. You threw away our marriage for something that didn't mean anything. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. The anger I'd been suppressing for months finally boiled over. You had a choice, Emily. You could have talked to me, told me how you felt, but instead, you lied, you cheated, and you destroyed everything we built together. And for what a cheap thrill? She didn't answer, just sat there, tears streaming down her face. The conversation ended shortly after that. I left the cafe feeling drained but oddly lighter. For the first time, I felt like I could finally start to move on. But life had other plans. A few weeks later, I received another unexpected message, this time from Peter, Emily's old co-worker. He wanted to meet, claiming he had information I needed to hear. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When we met, Peter wasted no time. I'm sorry to drag you back into this, he said, sliding a folder across the table. But you need to know what really happened. Inside the folder were photos, Emily and Aidan, together at various locations. Some were from months ago, but others were recent, very recent. She's still seeing him, Peter said quietly. The realization hit me like a freight train. All her apologies, all her promises, it was all a lie again. This time, I didn't bother confronting her. There was nothing left to say. I handed the photos to my lawyer and told him to push for a final divorce settlement as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, my life was unraveling in other ways. Work became a lifeline, the one place where I felt in control. But even there, cracks were starting to show. My focus wavered, my temper flared, and colleagues began avoiding me. The turning point came one night when I stayed late at the office, trying to bury myself in code. My boss Claire walked in, her expression equal parts concern and frustration. Daniel, she said, sitting down across from me. This isn't sustainable. You're a mess, and it's affecting your work. I opened my mouth to protest, but she held up a hand. I'm not saying this to be cruel, she continued. I'm saying it because I care. You need help. Talk to someone. Do something. Because if you keep going like this, you're going to burn out. Or worse. Her words stayed with me long after she left. She was right. I couldn't keep living like this. Angry, bitter, and stuck in the past. The next day, I made an appointment with a therapist. It was one of the hardest decisions I'd ever made, but also one of the best. Over the next few months, I began to heal. Therapy helped me unpack the anger and betrayal, to understand that while Emily's actions were her responsibility, I also had to take responsibility for my own happiness. One day, as I was packing up my office, preparing for a long overdue vacation, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. I'm sorry, it read, for everything. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. I didn't need her apologies anymore. I was finally free. If you've ever been through a situation like this, know that you're not alone. Healing takes time, but it's possible. Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil. Emily's continued lies had turned what could have been an amicable divorce into a full-blown war. Each new revelation added another layer to the tangled mess of our relationship, and it felt like the woman I'd loved for over a decade was a stranger I couldn't recognize. One afternoon, as I was sorting through documents for the divorce settlement, my lawyer called. His tone was urgent. Daniel, we've got a problem, he said. I sighed, rubbing my temples. What now? Emily's lawyer just submitted evidence claiming you've been hiding assets in offshore accounts, he explained. What? I said, stunned. That's absurd, I don't have any offshore accounts. She's alleging financial misconduct. It's a serious claim, and we need to address it immediately. Do you have any idea where this is coming from? My mind raced. Emily knew every detail of our finances, or at least I thought she did. This accusation wasn't just baseless, it was malicious. No idea, I replied. But this is her trying to drag me through the mud. I'll get you everything you need to prove it's a lie. As I hung up the phone, a wave of anger and frustration washed over me. Emily wasn't just trying to hurt me emotionally anymore. She was going after my career, my reputation, my future. The gloves were off. Determined to fight back, I spent the next several days gathering every financial record I could find. Late nights turned into early mornings, the stress gnawing at me with each passing hour. But beneath the exhaustion, a fire was building, a resolve to see this through, no matter the cost. Then came the tipping point. One evening, as I was finalizing a batch of documents, I received a call from Peter, Emily's former co-worker. Daniel, he said, his voice tense. I need to meet you tonight. Why, what's going on? I've got something you need to see, he said. It's about Emily, trust me. You'll want to know. We agreed to meet at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. When I arrived, Peter was already there, a manila envelope on the table in front of him. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around the room. What's this about? I asked, sitting down. He slid the envelope across the table. It's proof, he said. Emily's been hiding things, big things, and it's not just about the divorce. Inside were copies of emails, financial statements, and photographs, evidence that Emily had been embezzling funds from her job. Worse, it seemed she'd used my name and credentials to cover her tracks. She's been doing this for months, Peter said quietly. When I found out, I tried to confront her, but she threatened me. Said no one would believe me over her. I stared at the papers, my mind reeling. This wasn't just about us anymore. Emily's actions could destroy everything I'd worked for, not just my reputation, but my freedom. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice tight. "Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't," Peter admitted. "I know she's hurting you, and I want to help, but you need to act fast. If this gets out, it'll be a disaster, for both of you." I left the diner that night with a heavy heart and a plan forming in my mind. The next morning, I met with my lawyer and showed him the evidence. "This changes everything," he said grimly. "We need to take this to the authorities." I hesitated. Despite everything, the thought of turning Emily in felt like a betrayal of the woman I once loved, but the stakes were too high. If I stayed silent, I'd be complicit in her crimes. With my lawyer's guidance, I filed a report with the local authorities. The investigation moved quickly, and within days, Emily was confronted with the evidence she denied everything at first. But the weight of the proof was undeniable. The confrontation that followed was the most intense moment of my life. Emily showed up at my apartment unannounced, her eyes wild with desperation. "How could you do this to me?" she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "Do this to you?" I shot back, my anger boiling over. "You're the one who lied, cheated, and dragged my name through the mud. You did this to yourself, Emily." "I made mistakes," she sobbed. "But I didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve you turning me in." I shook my head, the weight of her words hitting me like a punch to the gut. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed yourself, and now you're facing the consequences." The conversation ended with Emily storming out, slamming the door behind her. It was the last time I saw her. The investigation led to her resignation from her job and legal proceedings that would haunt her for years. As for me, the ordeal was a turning point, a chance to rebuild my life from the ground up. Through it all, I found strength in unexpected places. Friends who stood by me, a therapist who helped me navigate the storm, and a newfound sense of resilience I didn't know I had. In the end, the climax of this story wasn't just about uncovering Emily's lies or surviving her betrayal. It was about rediscovering myself, finding closure, and moving forward. If you've been through something similar, know that you're not alone. Life has a way of testing us in the most painful ways, but those trials can also make us stronger. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. After Emily stormed out of my apartment, I felt an uneasy silence settle in. It was the kind of quiet that feels like the calm before a storm. I knew things weren't over, not by a long shot. Emily wasn't the type to fade away without a fight. And now that the legal system was involved, the stakes were higher than ever. A week later, I got a call from the detective handling Emily's case. He wanted me to come in for a follow-up interview. "There's been a development," he said, his voice clipped. "It's better if we discuss this in person." I spent the rest of the day spiraling through worst-case scenarios. What if the evidence Peter gave me wasn't solid? What if Emily had found a way to spin this against me? By the time I arrived at the precinct, I was a tightly wound ball of nerves. The detective, a grizzled man named Richards, didn't waste any time. "We've uncovered more than we initially expected," he said, sliding a thick file across the table. "Take a look." I opened the file and was immediately hit with a wave of nausea. It wasn't just emails and financial records anymore. There were wire transfers, falsified contracts, and even a shell company that Emily had created under my name. This wasn't just a case of embezzlement. It was a full-blown criminal operation. "She's been laundering money," Richard said, his tone grim. "We're still piecing it together, but it looks like she's been siphoning funds from her employer and moving them through dummy accounts. And since some of these accounts are tied to your name..." He didn't have to finish the sentence. I felt the blood drain from my face. You can't seriously think I'm involved in this, I said, my voice shaking. Richards held up a hand. We don't, he assured me. The evidence points to her as the mastermind. But you're collateral damage, and that's going to complicate things for you. I left the precinct feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under me. Emily's betrayal had already destroyed our marriage, but now it was threatening to take everything else. My reputation, my career, my future. I needed to act fast if I had any hope of clearing my name. The next day, I met with my lawyer and laid everything out on the table. We need to get ahead of this, I said. If Emily's actions come back on me, I could lose everything. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Claire, nodded thoughtfully. We'll start by gathering evidence to prove your innocence, she said. But you need to be prepared for a fight. Emily's not just reckless, she's dangerous. Claire's words proved to be prophetic. Over the next few weeks, Emily launched a full-scale attack, both legally and emotionally. She accused me of being the mastermind behind the embezzlement, painted herself as a victim, and even went so far as to claim I had emotionally abused her during our marriage. It was a smear campaign of epic proportions, and it left me reeling. But for every move Emily made, Claire and I countered. We subpoenaed witnesses, tracked down financial experts, and built a rock-solid case to expose the truth. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. The breaking point came during the pre-trial hearing. Emily was called to testify, and for the first time, her carefully constructed facade began to crack. Under cross-examination, she stumbled over her answers, contradicted herself, and ultimately admitted to creating the shell company. It was a small victory, but it was enough to shift the momentum in my favor. After the hearing, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Emily's downfall wasn't something I wanted. It was something I had to endure. The woman I once loved was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. As the case moved toward trial, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led to this point. Emily's betrayal, while devastating, had forced me to confront parts of myself I'd been avoiding for years. My workaholic tendencies, my inability to communicate, my blind trust. All of it had played a role in the collapse of our marriage. I wasn't blameless, and that realization was both humbling and freeing. The trial itself was a spectacle, drawing attention from the local media and turning my life into a public circus. Emily's defense team tried every trick in the book to deflect blame, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Witness after witness testified to her fraudulent activities, and by the time the prosecution rested its case, it was clear that Emily had dug her own grave. When the verdict finally came down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Emily was found guilty on multiple counts of embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud. She was sentenced to several years in prison, and while it wasn't the outcome I would have chosen, it was the one she had earned. In the aftermath of the trial, I began the slow process of rebuilding my life. Therapy became a cornerstone of my recovery, helping me navigate the complex emotions that came with betrayal and loss. I reconnected with friends I'd pushed away during my marriage, and even started volunteering at a local nonprofit as a way to find purpose beyond work. One evening, as I was sorting through old photos, I came across a picture of Emily and me from our honeymoon. We looked so happy, so full of hope for the future. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for what could have been. But then I set the photo aside and smiled. The past was the past, and it no longer defined me. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined for my life, but it was a new beginning. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to embrace it. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining me on this journey. Life is messy and unpredictable, but it's also full of opportunities to learn, grow, and start over. If this story resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. In the days following the verdict, I found myself grappling with a strange mix of emotions. relief, anger, and even a flicker of guilt Emily was paying for her actions. But the reality of her punishment brought no satisfaction, just a hollow sense of finality. For better or worse, this chapter of my life was closing. But as much as I wanted to leave it all behind, life had other plans. A week after the trial, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity got the better of me. "Daniel, it's Peter." I hadn't spoken to him since he handed over the evidence that helped expose Emily's crimes. His voice was urgent, almost frantic. "I know the trial's over," he said, "but there's something you need to know. Can we meet?" "Peter, I don't know if I can handle any more surprises," I said, exhaustion creeping into my voice. "This isn't about the trial," he insisted. "It's about Emily, trust me. You're going to want to hear this." Reluctantly, I agreed to meet him at the same diner where we'd first spoken. When I arrived, Peter was already there, nervously drumming his fingers on the table. "What's this about?" I asked, as I slid into the booth. Peter leaned in, lowering his voice. "Emily's been reaching out to me," he said. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean she's in prison?" "She's been calling me. Collect calls," Peter explained. "She says she has something on you, something she didn't bring up during the trial." I stared at him, my mind racing. What could she possibly have on me? Peter hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "I recorded one of the calls, you need to hear it." He pressed play, and Emily's voice crackled through the speaker. She sounded different, hardened, desperate. "Peter, you think you're helping him, but you're not," she said. "Daniel's not innocent in all this. He's hiding things too, things that could ruin him if they ever came to light." The recording ended, and Peter looked at me expectantly. "Is there anything she could be talking about?" "No," I said firmly. "She's grasping at straws, trying to drag me down with her. There's nothing." But as I left the diner, a seed of doubt took root. What if Emily had fabricated something? What if she'd set me up in ways I hadn't even realized? The thought was enough to send me spiraling all over again. I decided to get ahead of it. That evening, I went through every document, email, and financial record I could find. I was determined to leave no stone unturned, to make sure there was nothing Emily could use against me. As I sifted through files, memories of our life together surfaced. Moments of happiness that now felt tainted by lies. The weekend getaways. The nights spent laughing over cheap wine. The plans we'd made for a future that never came to pass. It all felt so far away, like a story that belonged to someone else. Hours turned into days as I pored over everything, but there was nothing. No hidden skeletons, no buried secrets. It was just me, standing on solid ground for the first time, in what felt like forever. Then came the email. It arrived late one night, the subject line blank. The sender was anonymous, and when I opened it, there was no text, just a single attachment. A video. Against my better judgment, I clicked play. The footage was grainy, shot from a distance, but the subjects were unmistakable. Emily and me, standing in front of my office building. It was from years ago, during a particularly heated argument. The audio was muffled, but my voice was raised, angry, as I gestured wildly. Emily stood there, looking small and vulnerable. The video ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the screen, my heart pounding. What was this a threat? A warning? I had no idea who sent it or why, but the timing felt deliberate. The next morning, I showed the video to Claire. She watched it with a critical eye, then sat back in her chair. "It's nothing," she said. "A piece of out-of-context footage. There's no way this can hurt you legally." But the knot in my stomach remained. Whoever sent the video wanted me to feel uneasy, and they'd succeeded. Over the next few days, more emails trickled in, photos, snippets of conversations, all from anonymous sources. None of it was incriminating, but it was enough to keep me on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder. The final straw came when I received a package at my apartment. Inside was a single note, typed in bold letters. "You're not as innocent as you think." That's when I realized this wasn't about Emily anymore. Someone else was pulling the strings, and I needed to find out who. I hired a private investigator to trace the emails and the package. The process was slow, frustrating, but I was determined to get answers. Then, one evening, the investigator called with a breakthrough. "Daniel, we traced the emails to an IP address," he said. "It's coming from Peter's home." My blood ran cold. Peter. The man who'd helped me, who'd claimed to be on my side, I couldn't believe it. The next day, I confronted him. We met in a public park, the tension crackling between us like static electricity. "Why, Peter?" I demanded, holding up the package. "Why are you doing this?" Peter's face crumpled, a mix of guilt and defiance. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. "But Emily, she got into my head. She made me believe you were hiding something, and I thought—" "You thought what?" I snapped. "That you'd destroy my life to protect her." "I didn't think it would hurt you," he said weakly. I stared at him, my anger simmering just below the surface. "You've done enough damage, stay out of my life." As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure, not just with Peter, but with everything. The lies, the betrayal, the chaos. It was finally over. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding therapy, became a lifeline, helping me process the whirlwind of emotions I'd been carrying for so long. I reconnected with friends, found joy in small things, and even started dating again. Through it all, one thing became clear. The past didn't define me. I'd been through hell and back, but I'd come out stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. In the months following Peter's confession and Emily's conviction, life slowly began to settle into a new normal. The storm that had consumed my world for so long finally seemed to be passing. For the first time in years, I could breathe again. Emily's sentence marked the end of her presence in my life. And with Peter out of the picture, the last ties to that chaotic chapter were cut. It wasn't easy to move on. I won't pretend that it was. Trust doesn't rebuild itself overnight, and healing doesn't happen in neat, linear stages. But bit by bit, I began to reclaim my life. Therapy became more than just a tool for recovery. It became a space for reflection and growth. My therapist helped me unpack not only the pain of betrayal, but also the patterns in my life that had made me vulnerable to it. I learned to set boundaries, to communicate more openly, and to value myself in ways I hadn't before. Work, which had once been my escape, became something different entirely. I took a step back from the grind and started mentoring younger colleagues, finding fulfillment in helping others avoid the mistakes I'd made. The sense of purpose I found there was something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. And then there was the farm. On a whim one weekend, I decided to take a drive out to the countryside. There was no specific destination in mind. I just wanted to be somewhere quiet, somewhere that didn't remind me of all the chaos I'd left behind. I ended up in a little town about an hour from the city, where rolling fields stretched as far as the eye could see. As I stood there, watching the sun set over the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It was as if the land itself was telling me to slow down, to let go. A few months later, I bought a small piece of property on the outskirts of town, a modest farmhouse with enough land to grow a garden and maybe keep a few animals someday. The farm became my sanctuary. Mornings were spent tending to the garden, afternoons reading on the porch, and evenings watching the stars. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life I needed. Each day was a reminder that healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about building something new in its place. Of course, there were moments of doubt. Moving forward doesn't mean you're immune to looking back. I thought about Emily sometimes, wondered if she was finding her own version of peace. I'll never know for sure. And I've made my peace with that. Then there were the unexpected moments of connection. One evening, while picking up supplies at the local hardware store, I struck up a conversation with the clerk, a woman named Sarah. She had a quick wit and a warm smile, the kind of presence that made you feel at ease instantly. We talked about gardening, of all things, what vegetables grow best in the local soil, how to keep the deer away from the tomatoes. Before I left, she handed me her number, scrawled on the back of my receipt. "If you ever need help with that garden," she said with a wink. It wasn't a grand, sweeping romance, but it was something better. Genuine. We started slow. Coffee dates, long walks, shared dinners on my porch. Sarah was patient, understanding, and above all, honest. She didn't try to fix me or rush me into anything I wasn't ready for. She simply met me where I was, and together, we began to build something new. Looking back, I see now that the person I was at the start of this journey wouldn't have been ready for someone like Sarah. It took everything I went through, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the hard-won lessons, to get to this point. And while I wouldn't wish my experience on anyone, I can say with certainty that it shaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and more open to the possibilities of life. The final chapter of this story isn't about what I lost. It's about what I found. A sense of self, a connection to the world around me, and a relationship built on trust and mutual respect. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. And sometimes, the things you thought were endings turn out to be beginnings in disguise. To those of you who followed this journey, thank you. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this story, it's that no matter how dark things may seem, there's always a way forward. It might not be easy, and it might not look the way you imagined, but it's there, waiting for you to take the first step. If you enjoyed this story or found it meaningful, please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more stories of resilience, redemption, and the twists and turns of life. Until next time, take care and keep moving forward.